We've spoken on this podcast before about things like bullying. Right? Schools are equipped to handle physical violence between students, but less able to deal with things like cyberbullying and verbal abuse. The same is true for domestic violence. There are programs in place that can deal with physical and sexual abuse, but there are fewer resources to deal with emotional or verbal violence. My name is Eric Bowman. I'm the communications person at the Canadian Psychological Association, and this is our podcast, Mindful. Remember the COVID-19 pandemic? It wasn't that long ago, but many of us have kind of memory holed the entire traumatic experience. And that said, just because we don't think about it anymore, doesn't mean that the effects aren't still being felt today. For example, rates of gender-based violence, including femicide, remain elevated above pre-pandemic levels. This is particularly the case in rural communities and is evident in the attitudes and behaviors of kids in schools. Our experts are here to tell us more.
So my name is Sabina Greenlee. I've been working in the violence against women field for over 20 plus years. And I also founded Queer Village. I also run some baseball teams. And I also have been a professor for the social service worker program at Georgian and Humber College for about 5 years. So yeah, that's me.
Baseball teams, that's exciting. If we have time, I'm coming back to that toward the end. Maddie.
Yeah, so I am a researcher. I just wrapped up my PhD at Carleton University.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I work with the Health, Wellness, and Equity Research Group. So that's a broad scope, I guess. But my PhD research was looking at service accessibility in rural Ontario and rural Canada using a whole bunch of mixed methods. So yeah, and I'm living in Nelson, BC right now, which is a fun little stint, but originally from Ottawa.
Excellent. And we're going to talk about a study that you guys did. Just give me an overview of that before we get into it.
Yeah, so I can jump in. So I think it's really neat to have, I think it will be neat also kind of have this conversation because Sabina is right in there on the, working with so many folks in schools and otherwise. And I'm kind of in this little researcher perspective. So I think like a lot of what I can bring will also be very different and hopefully complementary. But this was a part of a qualitative study where I interviewed service providers and we talked about a whole range of things around service accessibility in rural Ontario and some of the barriers and facilitators to accessing services. And one thing that really came up was kind of the ongoing and long-term impacts of the pandemic and how this sector especially is really still feeling it. And so this paper really broke that down into, themes around what's going on. It's been 5 years since COVID. I think people have a tendency to feel this COVID fatigue. It's over. We don't want to talk about it anymore. But sectors like the violence against women sector or GBV, gender-based violence are still really, really feeling this in an intense way. So that was the purpose of this paper. And I think really to just draw attention to that was our goal and my goal writing the paper. Like we need to get this out there and we can't stop talking about it.
And Sabina, what does that look like for you on the ground? This continuation from the pandemic, an uptick in domestic violence incidents and that sort of thing. What does that look like from your perspective?
So I do work for a violence against women organization for 20 plus years. I'm a youth educator currently. I did start on the ground floor of being a shelter worker and then a parent-child counselor, and now I'm a youth educator. So now I'm in the schools. But I am going to say I'm lucky enough that our agency has committed to youth education, and it's a completely fundraised program. And so we ran programs for 10 plus years prior to COVID in schools. And so grade 5, 6, 7, 8 is our focus, and each grade has a different focus. So it could be increasing self-esteem or increasing empathy levels or learning about healthy relationships or stereotypes, right? What are stereotypes and what they can lead to? And it got to the point where pre-pandemic, we were like, I don't know if we even need to talk about gender stereotypes anymore because people seem to be on the same page. People seem to be talking about equity and healthy relationships, and things are moving along so smoothly, so nicely. And then COVID happened. And when we got back into the schools after COVID, because we do have pre and post tests, what we noticed is the empathy levels were the lowest they'd ever been in 10, 15 plus years. The classroom climate, like the respect level in the classrooms, lowest level it had been in 10, 15 years. And then myself as a facilitator, so I've been in the schools for 10 plus years, then COVID, then after COVID, some of the misogyny that I experienced and some of the language that I was hearing and some of the things I was seeing, I was like, and now if you even say the word gender in school, right? Like we had talked about, maybe we don't even need to talk about gender stereotypes. Well, I'm like, no, we do need to talk about gender stereotypes. But if you even say the word gender, I mean, the amount of hate that comes forward is unbelievable. So,
Right. Yeah, and I wonder, and we talked about this during COVID and, a little bit as it was ending, that when people got sent home and started working from home if they could, some of course couldn't, but those who did get sent home and started working from home, and I'm thinking in terms of, the people I spoke with were, psychologists or academics who worked at universities and that sort of thing, that all of the gender stereotypes that people thought that they had moved past sort of resurfaced, and that, okay, both parents are working from home. Mom is a professor at, U of T, and dad is also a professor. But mom takes on all of the other roles at home, and his job becomes more important. Her house duties, taking care of the kids, making dinner, become more important. And even though they thought they'd moved past that, they reverted to that as soon as COVID hit. Is that sort of what you're talking about? Is that some of the carryover, or are there other things that we're not considering?
for me specifically,
Uh, Either one of you.
so what I'm going to say is, what I noticed is people would say, like, call people names like the B word and then just go, but I'm just joking. And I'm like, no, the use of that word is inappropriate and you're 12 or
Right.
11. Right. So for me, it was more of seeing some of those behaviors, blocking females from leaving a classroom and going, well, I'm just flirting. No, they've specifically asked for you to like move and you're saying no, so that's not flirting, right?
Right. Right.
So there seems to be some disconnect between like what's okay, what's not okay, and understanding that like yeah, just the use of language, the behaviors, all of those things, what people think is okay today compared to like pre-pandemic, I'm like, I feel we've shifted backwards a little bit, and I don't, yeah, and there's some
Yeah.
theories about why, but yes, I feel like we've shifted backwards a little bit.
Right. And I mean, I don't want you guys to specifically get into the why, but it does strike me that, in addition to the pandemic, we have a whole new world thanks to what's happening south of the border. And, when you said, oh, I said a terrible word, but I'm just joking, that seems to be something that is now pervasive in our culture. I can say whatever I want as long as I couch it in the language of a joke, or tell you that I'm just saying a joke, so everything's fine as long as I'm just trying to be humorous in some way, and I can say anything I like, right? And I don't know how much the pandemic plays into that or not, but that strikes me as something that I see far more often online and in person, and no doubt that it's going to come down to the kids too, right?
Yeah, that's what we had talked about it a bit, Sabine, around, yeah, influences, spending more time even online and social media and some of these, like toxic masculine messages that are coming through in that way. And, you pair that with high stress, mental health is really impacts people's mental health. There's this stress, I think, related to finances as well, or precarious job situations. And then you have people isolated in a house with, their family members, which is maybe very likely not a regular situation for some. And so you're kind of creating this, from my understanding, like an environment that can lead to or produce a higher likelihood of there being some form of violence, whether that's, I was thinking a bit about this idea of definitions and what language are we using and defining, gender-based violence. And it's something I've thought about a lot because there's, traditionally we think of intimate partner violence, domestic violence, physical violence, sexual violence, but a lot of what people are kind of starting to talk about and acknowledge now, and I think it's probably seeing a bit of a trickle down with UCB, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, but around coercive control and emotional abuse, and what does that look like, and what's okay and what's not okay, and healthy relationships. And so we're kind of expanding our understanding and how we talk about gender-based violence. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear kind of your thoughts on that too, Sabina, because I'm sure like on the ground, it's very different in terms of language and definitions.
Yeah, so for my co-facilitator and I, we really, really approach things from a healthy relationship perspective. We don't want to do an us versus them, right? So like it's one gender versus the other. We're like, no, we all need to be on the same page, right? And so one example we use is, if a male slaps a female, is that taken seriously at school, and how would people react? And they're like, oh yeah. And they talk about, oh, very seriously, and you don't slap out, you don't use physical. And I'm like, oh, interesting. And then when we ask, is verbal a form of violence? So many of them are like, no. And I'm like, no, yes, it is. So I think even the definition of people understanding, is emotional a form of violence? Is verbal a form of violence? But then we also turn the tables to say, hey, if a female slaps a male, do the teachers react the same way? And they say no. And I'm like, okay, so that's the problem, right? Mm-hmm. Like if we want to address gender-based violence and we're talking about equity, then everybody deserves the same respect. Everybody deserves the same, right? Like safety. And when we're talking about gender-based violence, I think people are like, oh yeah, physical, sexual, 101. Yeah, absolutely. We don't do that. But then, we talk about, do we block people from leaving their classrooms? Do we call people those names? Do we spit on people, right? And then go, oh, well, that's not physical. And I'm like, they're like, I didn't hit anybody. And I'm like, okay, spitting on people?
Right.
It's physical.
Yes.
So,
right.
But it's a lack of understanding. Like it's really a lack of understanding. And I think that's across the board. I think even adults don't really understand gender-based violence. I think they automatically assume intimate partner violence or domestic violence, but they're not talking about all the layers that exist. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is something we've talked about a lot too, specifically in the context of bullying in schools, right? That schools have a mechanism in place when there is a physical altercation. Mm-hmm. They know how to deal with that. But verbal bullying, online bullying, cyber stalking, all of those things, schools seem terribly ill-equipped to handle that. Like, how do you equip your school to be able to handle those things in a way that the administration understands it the way that we hope that they would? I'm sorry. Was that too big a question?
Big question. No, you know what? I think it's really, really hard because I feel like everybody needs to get on the same page. And I feel like, teachers are like, I need admin support. And then admin is like, well, I need the board support. And the board is like, I need the, right? And so there's all these layers. And I'm going to tell you, I have a teacher or a principal I know, and she would, every time somebody said something derogatory, like calling somebody the N-word, and that's 100% racist and discriminatory, she would like, yep, you're in the office, we're making the call to parents, you are suspended. And she said, do you know how many times I've been pulled into the board office to be like, was that the correct procedure? Did you take the right steps? And every single time the answer was like, yeah, she did the right thing. She did the right job. But even, sometimes parents not having right? Like parents not supporting, like,
Right.
well, what did you do to my
Mm,
student for them to call you that name? And I'm like, you don't get to call anybody that name, period. You know what I
Right.
mean? You don't get to use the B word, you don't get to use the N word, you don't get to use, like, you don't get to use any of those words. I don't care about the circumstances. So, so it's hard because it's a multi-layer approach of like, can we address this in a way where it is taken seriously and people understand the ramifications and understand like the consequences get worse and worse as you get older. As an adult, if you do some of these things, it's illegal. You will
Right.
be, right? And so I don't know if kids understand. And so I'm saying that because I work with kids, right? But even with parents, like even what they call self-defense, and they teach their kids what self-defense is. And I'm like, actually, and so I was a volunteer police officer, auxiliary officer for 3 years. But I'm like, I don't think, like, I'm like, your parents are misunderstanding the definition of self-defense. That is not self-defense. So there's so many layers and it's so complicated. And I, yeah, and so I think there is like it's a multifaceted approach that's needed. You can't just focus on like one level because it's so like interconnected with each other.
Right. And just to drill down on that a little bit, the self-defense thing, I assume that my vision, the way that I'm perceiving this, right? Parents get their kids into a self-defense class, right? Maybe you start taking jujitsu or something. And I think in the parent's mind that says, okay, that means that you can win a fight if a fight starts, which I think is what you're saying is not self-defense, right? Am I in the right ballpark?
So so I'm going to say kids will say, well, if they call me a name or if they hit me first, then I have the right to do whatever I want to them.
Right.
Right? So that's what they see as self-defense. When in actuality, just because somebody is triggering or they do call you a name or they do physically assault you, that doesn't give like that's not self-defense to hit back, right? Like legally, that's not the term of self-defense. So
Right.
yeah, just because somebody assaulted you, you have the right to assault them back.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And Maddie, in your study, as you looked at this, coming out of COVID wave, you mentioned earlier, right, that a lot of us have sort of tried to forget about it. And it is amazing to me how much we've been able to memory hole something that happened so recently and that was so catastrophic for the entire world. And we seem to just move past it and pretend like that never existed or be able to completely forget the things that did happen. And I'm conscious that I started working at the CPA like a week before COVID hit. And I still find myself sending emails to people saying, I'm the new person at the CPA. Well, I've been there 6 years. It's just that it feels like no time has passed because 3 of those years have disappeared from my memory entirely, right? And I'm wondering, as you see these results of your study coming out of this, how much are you able to attribute to the pandemic, to the lockdown, to the measures that were in place, and how much of it is still sort of I don't know what the word is, but like there's another causality that we can't quite put our finger on, kind of thing.
yeah, it's a big question. I think someone I spoke with in this quote is actually in the study because I thought it really nicely kind of explained what's going on, where it said COVID hit, and then we have this mental health crisis at the same time. We have a housing crisis going on, so stress is going up. Mental health is you know not getting any better. If anything, it's getting a lot worse. And then you have on top of that this isolation. So putting everything together, just again, kind of created this environment that made experiences of violence much worse, and a lot of people feel less safe and were less safe in their home environment. So I would say it's the organizations specifically that are really feeling kind of these ongoing impacts as well from the folks I spoke with. But there was also a lot of service changes that had to be made and adaptations. So, programs that had maybe started or were in place were peeled all the way back because it was really this emergency response, especially when we're talking in the rural communities. There were outreach or partnerships in really rural towns or in really, remote parts of the province. And those, again, were kind of just like not prioritized, and they couldn't be prioritized because there wasn't capacity. So from my understanding, there's a lot of this like rebuilding going on from some of the kind of partnership models that were happening. It's like starting over and from scratch. Again, like there's this really emergency response lens just on everything. And in doing so, I think progress that was being made, even like prevention work that was being done, had to be sidelined because things were just had to be shuffled and reprioritized. So I think in that way, there's this feeling of having to rebuild.
And I imagine too, like the more rural, the more remote you are, the more isolated you are, and the more left behind you were when COVID hit. Maybe you don't have access to the same level of internet the rest of us do. Maybe you can't therefore work because you can't do it remotely, that kind of thing. Your program was in person, now you can't go to it, and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. Or even like people coming to you. There's a lot of places will have like find safe spaces in more rural communities like churches or libraries to meet up with people. And again, those partnerships I think were really stifled during COVID just because everything was shut down. So in kind of the process of just reestablishing that, and even transportation, like there were some pretty innovative like transportation things going on and conversations around that, but that seems to have just kind of fallen off as well. And in the meantime, like we think about all of these things, and then parallel to that, there's increasing femicides in Ontario and in Canada. So we have, capacity decreasing, organizational capacity. We have funding decreases. Prevention is, well, I won't speak, the new government is investing in it, so here for that. But prior to that, it's all pretty much off the side of organizations' desks. They have to do local fundraising, from my understanding.
Yeah.
So it's just it's organizational capacity alongside more severe violence, more deaths. So it's just kind of it's a thing that we can't ignore, and we have to talk about.
And can I just add to that to say, so from the youth perspective, during COVID, youth were at home, sometimes with parent supervision, sometimes not, 24/7. And the only thing they could do was online stuff. So I think they were consuming a whole lot more online than they were previously. And when they first got back to school, cell phones were allowed in classrooms, but they saw the negative impact that was having and the negative behaviors that was also causing within classrooms, within the cyberbullying, all of those things. And so now most schools have said no more cell phones in classrooms. And I'm going to tell you, some of the kids have actually said, I am so grateful, thank God. Right. But honestly, like when I see someone sneaking his cell phone in and they're texting somebody during the day, and I'm like, and there's nobody else in the car, and I'm like, who are you texting? Like, like, what have you been exposed to? And I'm going to tell you, I know people as young as 11 or 12 in this community who I'm like, red flags all over the place about human trafficking. Are they being groomed? Right. And I also feel like the videos that kiddos may have been watching, depending on families, supervision, all of those things, the violence was normalized and they've almost become desensitized. Right. And then they watch these things and then they come into school and I'm like, and everybody says kids are resilient. Oh, COVID, kids are resilient. Oh, kids are resilient. I'm like, but are they really? Or are we just like, they see something and then they go to class and then how do they process that? Do you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder too, right? we do think of kids as resilient, but also very malleable, right? And
Yeah.
that you spend a heck of a lot of time online and you consume all of these things. I mean, you said earlier, right? Just bringing up the word gender in class causes a big furor now. And that has to come from this online, campaign against transgender people that exists and that, kids are going to consume. And the resilience of the kid, now you get them, they come back from this and now they're sort of entrenched in this world in a way. Is the resilience their ability to bounce back? Is the malleability the way to reshape them and direct them in another way? Or is that now more entrenched in them because they're younger and they've, bought into it in a little bit more of a I guess, I don't know, like, but in a more aggressive way, I know, I
Yeah.
guess.
So, Maddie, I'm just going to speak to it for a second and then I'll let you jump in. But I am going to say our pre-tests, right? So, since COVID, and so we've now been in the schools, right? 5, 6 years since it, the empathy levels are coming back. The classroom climate is coming back. So, for me, that gives me hope, right? Like, I'm actually hopeful that I feel like, you know what, now that these structures are back in place. And now that we have some adults like, saying, you know what, the cell phones are gone for the day. And so the curriculum is the curriculum, and that's what you get to consume for the day. There is no algorithm of what I feel like we are slowly, the pendulum is slowly coming back. But it's really hard when, kiddos are in the classroom for how many hours, but then online for how many hours? You know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah, so sometimes I feel like it's an uphill battle, but I do feel hopeful because I feel like some things are shifting ever so slightly, but such a long way to go. We went backwards way too quickly, way too fast.
Yeah, I was taking notes. I was just because I had two thoughts and I tend to lose them. But I think it was, again, it's in the paper, so this isn't like if you've read it. And I think it was a conversation we had, Sabina, but it was also around like having support of parents at home. So there seems to have been this shift as well. And tell me if this sounds familiar, because I believe there's a conversation with you. Around support for that in school work. So not only maybe are kids experiencing this, but then there's actually a resistance to it on a parental level. And another service provider was telling me, there's a bit of a shift in demographics or kind of what smaller rural communities are looking like. People are moving in and out. And so in diversifying, I think, in certain contexts in certain parts of the province. And so, again, to think of the rural lens, this kind of maybe, whoa, like backlash a little bit to these changes in demographics and how does that kind of trickle down and impact their support or, resistance to in-school work. That was really interesting to me as well, because, does not make your job any easier to be talking about trying to just have conversations around healthy relationships and getting this maybe backlash. But again, this is just me kind of summarizing what I remember and how I perceive the conversation. But yeah, I think like that like layered complexity of doing prevention work is important.
And I wonder too, Sabina, maybe you can answer this. Right? You had a program going, you were saying it was working really well right up until COVID. So up until like 2019. The kids who were in that program at that time are now 7 years older, right? I mean, they may have kids of their own at this point if they were teenagers at that time, right? It's all new kids that you're now seeing, trying to put them into this same program, but it's new kids who have had a completely different childhood and different experiences and different everything. Do you have to revamp the program in that way to reach kids in a different way who are different kids coming from a different place?
So what I'm going to say is every summer, teachers are always like, "Oh, you get the summer off." No, we don't. So our program is very, very much a living, breathing document. And I say document, but like, program where our summers are spent modifying, revamping every single lesson of every single program to make sure that it is still, you know, we call it fundicational. It's fun and educational at the same time, so we can keep the kids engaged. But also, like, our manager has talked about, oh, maybe you want to spend more time on that, and I'm like, no, no, kids, their attention spans are like so short. Like we have to move quickly. We can't spend so much, like each slide, because we do it using PowerPoint. Each slide needs to move quickly. We need to have lots of images on it. The images need to move, right? Like it's just trying to keep the kids engaged while they're learning. And so things have shifted considerably from where we've started to where we are now. And even the content we've had to shift, right? And so yeah. And so, 5 years ago, were we talking about human trafficking? Like pre-COVID? No. Are we talking
Right.
about human trafficking in classrooms now? Yes. So it's just we're constantly shifting what we're teaching, but also how we're doing it to try and yeah, make sure that the kiddos can stay engaged. They're also and that they're learning, and that they can make the connection. So we find stories, telling them real stories about what's really happened in our community, and we never give names, but like the real stories really make connections to the kids. So we can give them the education piece, but if we can share a real story about like this is an experience somebody had, then they're like, oh my gosh. And so that's where we really get the kiddos is if we can help them understand like the connection between what we're teaching and then the real life experiences.
And is that a question of empathy, sort of teaching empathy or regrowing empathy? You said that they'd lost a lot of that over the course of the pandemic.
Um, I do feel like empathy can be taught because again, I have hope. And it is, and one of our programs is 8 weeks about, and it's all about empathy and using empathy and so situations where people's differences, be it their learning, their skin tone, their sexuality. But I have to tell you, like we always let parents know, like we let the teachers know we're coming into the classrooms, the teachers let the parents know, and we've had parents call us to say, "What's your agenda?" And I'm like, "Our
Right.
agenda." Our agenda is healthy relationships, right? And they're like, well, are you going to be talking about trans issues or gay and I'm like, actually, yes, in this lesson, it's about having empathy for, it's about treating people with respect. It's about, and so sometimes we have had parents say, yeah, my kid won't be in school on that day. And I'm
Right.
like, right. Okay. So,
Right.
right.
And does that worry you in some way? Does that mean that you feel like you're preaching to the choir? Like the kid who really needs to be reached is probably the one whose parent is keeping him out, right?
Yes. 100%. So, and honestly, like, and I did share this with Maddie, and I think it's in your report, but Orangeville, because that's where I am, Dufferin County. Orangeville is, rural, but somewhat bigger, and they did a Pride crosswalk. And
Right.
so, but within 4 days, 3 to 4 days, it was vandalized. Like somebody they graffitied, right? So
Right.
young people had graffitied it. In Shelburne, part of Dufferin County, very rural, within 3 hours, it was
Wow.
vandalized, completely destroyed. And so it is a matter of like, you know, yeah, please don't pull your kid out of the program. Please don't pull, and and so I have had students say to me, "Are you trying to change my belief system? Are you trying to change my values? Are you trying to?" And I'm like, "No, no, 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 no." I'm like, your belief system is your belief system. I'm just giving you a perspective, and you as a human being have to decide where you feel most comfortable, right? What do you feel is comfortable for you? What sits right for you? What feels right for you? Treating people with respect, acceptance, helping them feel safe to be who they are in their communities. Does that feel good to you or does it not? Right? And so so that's the way I try to frame it. I don't want anybody feeling like I'm trying to change their cultural beliefs or their religious beliefs or anything, but it is a matter of like, it's just a point of view And are we willing to hear it? That's it. That's all.
Right. And I think that's all we can hope for from anyone is the willingness to hear the opposing point of view or, something that you hadn't considered previously. Maddie, we got about 2 minutes left. I'm going to close with you. I'm cognizant that I'm calling you Maddie, even though I should be calling you Dr. Shepard Perkins. I call everyone doctor now who has a PhD, but we go way back. So, Dr. Shepard Perkins, we're gonna close with you, and just on that theme, right? Hearing opposing points of view and hearing these things. As you do this study and you see this uptick in violence, and when you sort of quantify that. And put this report out. How do you look at violence the way that we started this whole thing? Physical, sexual, but also verbal and emotional violence. How does that get categorized in a study like this?
Oh boy, Eric, we only have 1 minute left, so I'm going to try and be brief.
I'm pigeonholing you into this very brief time here now.
Yeah, and what I'm going to say is mixed methods approaches are so important because I worked with hospitalization data for people coming into emergency rooms for abuse. And I sat as primarily a community-based qualitative researcher. I'm like, how do I represent this in a way that is not going to be weaponized? It's going to be, there's only so much I can do with this data. I'm inheriting it. I didn't create this survey. There's a lot of caveats. So then it's like, okay, but what is valuable? And one example, and I'll be, again, really quick, but the hospital, in terms of how they code these abuses, they're different codes. So they're sexual, physical, and emotional, but that is all predefined, right? So you lose this nuance. And that's where talking to people like Sabina, chatting with service providers, hopefully, and survivors of gender-based violence or people in these schools, and doing this evaluation provides the most important context and allows us to actually have, regional specific recommendations and approaches.
It's important that we all embrace the nuances Dr. Shepard Perkins speaks about and that we remain committed to helping our kids understand them as well. My thanks to Maddie and Sabina for taking the time to do this today, and to you at home for listening, streaming, downloading, and sharing today's episode. Mindful is written, hosted, and published by me, Eric Bowman. Our producer and editor is Jamie Montgomery, and Avenues by David Taylor is our theme music. See you next week as Psychology Month continues.